Good evening, everybody, and hello, Dorian. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
I did an experiment. I released some YouTube shorts. Have you seen these, Dorian?
I've seen a few of them.
Yeah, so I got various bits of feedback. I had some people saying really loved the music. I had some other people, to be fair, more people saying hated the music. Get rid of the music.
I
don't know.
didn't catch
I watched.
the ones with the music, so I don't know how good or bad they were.
It was quite quiet, but I don't know. I watched some of them back, and they were coming across as a little bit sentimental. I think maybe there's an inherent issue in the fact that you've only got 60 seconds, and that makes it feel like the target audience is people who don't have much time in their life for biblical content, which is inherently a bad thing anyway. but I don't know.
We're doing kind of the opposite today, and we're taking this long form rambling conversation for hours on end, and kind of in between those things is the sort of written down and planned and well structured preachers speech list, and I think there's room for all of that in terms of discussing the biblical narratives.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And I guess there are formulations like that. You can see for what I received, I also passed on to you that Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread and wine. You know, they clearly did condense ideas down into short packets of information. So, you know, let's not pretend to be so high and mighty that we refuse to find brevity in the plan of God when it's there in Scripture. But having said that, let us embark upon a 4-hour discussion about the devil.
Oh dear.
I tell you what, shall I pray quickly before we get started?
Absolutely.
Great. Let's pray. Lord God, thank you that we can always come to you. Thank you that you are willing to teach us and mold us, despite the fact that we've previously turned against you and rebelled. And Lord, this evening, as we take a particular interest in the satanic and devilish forces described in your word, may it be done with caution and without too much allure. May we get to a position of understanding the true nature and the true danger of the forces that oppose your will. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Great. Well, I'll pass over to you. You have a plan, I believe.
Oh, I'm the man with the plan. Yeah. There's 3 things I kind of want to hit on with this stream, and if I've accomplished them, I'm quite happy with myself. The first of which is that Satan is a figure that we all kind of intimately are familiar with, but we don't understand him at all, which is part of why he's so terrifying. You know, Pajot talks about a lot of these things with the margin, where the hybrids are, the things that we don't understand, and that's what horror is. And the second thing is that there's this kind of evolutionary view of the Bible that I think even Christians now have been kind of gaslit into, and the idea that in the beginning there was talking snakes with legs, and one of them was the devil, and he got his legs cut off by God, and then he's kind of this hidden, wandering figure throughout the Old Testament, and then we get to the time of Jesus, at which point he's regained his legs somehow, and he's got horns, and he's tempting the devil, and that's the one that's with us now. And then in the end, he's going to sort of metamorphosize again into this 7-headed dragon. So I kind of want to beat that position down today and really show that the whole picture is there from the beginning in Genesis 3, and moving forward it only develops.
Yes, and I suppose one of the reasons that we have these misconceptions is because we live in a culture that retains some of the hangovers of cultural Christianity. We've got ideas that were formed in medieval art and literature and don't have any biblical, were acknowledged at the time as being works of fiction, but have now become indistinguishable in most people's minds from canon, but are demonstrably incorrect in some ways.
This is another thing I wanted to hit on, is that there seems to be this kind of reverse atheism with some Christians, where they look at the kind of kitsch simulacra of Christianity that they see around them, and they see the image of the devil in this kind of terribly photoshopped picture, and he's got horns and red skin and a tail, and they think, oh, that's not real. And scholars will continue on this and say that this image of the devil is something that's developed artistically and has no real root in what the devil is or the scripture. And I push back against that, because I think the image isn't really arbitrary, and no depiction is truly arbitrary. We make these things for a reason. The Bible has no pictures. It can only refer to things, and that's kind of the nature of spiritual things, is that you can only refer to them. We can't see God, for example. But I think we just have to hold it together in terms of all these things. It's rather horrible to think about, but we should kind of humble ourselves in the way that we might think we know what we're talking about, because I've certainly learned a lot researching this topic on that.
So sometimes the attempts to make things easier to understand just result in us diminishing them, and it's better to accept all of the individual pieces and try to grapple with them, rather than trying to shortcut all the time to, we should be able to understand this in a sentence and move on with our lives. Like there are ideas that are just on a human level difficult and require thinking and effort.
Definitely. So I suppose we should begin. I watched the stream with you and Philip Crit last week, and I thought, well, this is very providential, because I was planning to begin this stream by talking about the definite article in Hebrew. Yes.
Amazing. Which
yes,
I can't remember right now. Tell me, which letter was it?
It's ha.
Ha. This one with the.
Yeah. It's the letter he, but you assume the aleph is the vowel, and that's part of Hebrew as well, is that the biblical Hebrew doesn't have any vowels in it, so at least there's some kind of arbitration as to how the words are pronounced. But the definite article is the in English. For those who don't know, it definitely says something. So there can be many coins, but if you point to one coin and say, this is the coin, that's what I'm speaking to, the lambda today.
Yes.
There are many people who say I am lambda, but I'm speaking to the lambda today.
I set that explanation up months in advance for you.
Absolutely, yes. And weird things can happen with definite articles. One of the examples that's easy to understand in English is the earth. So if I pick up a clump of dirt and I point at it and I say, this is the earth, that makes sense. But if I say the earth, we don't understand that to be just one of a piece of the land, but the whole land, everything, the entire planet.
Yes.
And the same exists in Hebrew. The word for earth in Hebrew is eretz. And so to say
ha'eretz,
yes, that's exactly it. So eretz means land. It also has the connotation of ground. So whenever there's millions of usages of eretz in the Bible, but in the beginning, God created the haaretz, created the whole earth. There again, and that's easy enough to understand. But the thing, and the way that it sort of takes finite and literally definites it, it points to the kind of archetypal earth of earth, the
Yes.
land of the lands
There's-
come together in the concept of earth.
So there's kind of two ways that the definite article can operate, if I'm understanding you correctly. There is the kind of reference form, like if you had if you were mailing out queen bees to people who'd mail ordered to try to start bee colonies, you could say, this is the bee that I'm going to send you, referencing the bee that you're talking about in this instance. But if we
Yes,
say
absolutely.
the queen, as in, if you take the idea of a queen and there's one queen we're talking about, we probably mean the Queen of England. At least, if you're British,
Yes, we do. Yeah,
the
okay, yeah.
queen is saying, take the general concept of queen. What is the one reference that always points towards, in any, absent of a particular reference frame? And so the earth could be the same thing. Like, yes, we've got
when we look
this.
at reality, we have a kind of infinitely complex amount of things. So if you look at a chair, it's made up of a leg and a seat, and those are made up of wood, and the wood is made up of all of these different dead sort of I can't remember the word from it from high school biology, but the ligature of the dead wood cells, and those break down into atoms and further to the point where we can't even perceive it. So that's kind of infinite space. But when we use the definite article, we say this is the chair. We sort of call together one thing into a unified concept, and it's this kind of Platonic form, this archetypal language that Hebrew makes so easy, that I think calls people like Jordan Peterson to be so interested in the early biblical stories. And you see it also, since we're cross streaming with them, on the unpopular opinions terms, the fat controller, the net negative,
Yes.
these things. But the problem with
Yeah.
Hebrew, the earth example is easy to understand, but the problem with Hebrew is that it uses it for everything. So for
Okay.
example, Adam, the word for Adam just means man, right? As I'm sure many people know. But Ha-Adam is the man, but it is also
Okay.
mankind. All of mankind, all of humanity is Ha-Adam. And that's very strange to think about, but in the same way that all of the lands make up Ha-Eretz, all of the Eretz make up Ha-Eretz, all of the Adams make up Ha-Adam. And when we read the account of Eden, Adam is the man in that he is Ha-Adam. And this leads to all sorts of strange modern interpretations that it's like a kind of allegorical origin of mankind and these sorts of things. But the truth is, when you read that account, is it talking about a man, the origin of a man, or is it talking about the origin of mankind? Well, the answer is both, isn't it?
Given that all of mankind originated in Adam, and as in Adam all sinned, and all this,
Yes, absolutely.
the ambiguity in the Hebrew is actually deeply appropriate in this story.
Yes, this is one of the problems with not just this in Hebrew, but many sort of grammatical and linguistic quirks of the language is that, especially biblical Hebrew, like I mentioned earlier, it messes. There are no vowels in biblical Hebrew, so pronunciation becomes arbitrary as well. Now that gives up a little precision that we're so
Attached to.
attached to in the modern world, but it does that in reward for that, and a trade-off. What it gets is it's able to sort of convey this kind of spiritual world of where things come together and are unified, like this. So
Yeah.
it gets even more complicated.
I guess there's a sense in which sometimes the issues in understanding Hebrew texts can be presented as if, what a shame, Hebrew is the way that it is. Wouldn't it be better if it was a modern, precise language? Whereas, in fact, God, if he needed to communicate more clearly, could have affected the development of the language differently, or whatever was necessary. I would imagine in his divine providence, Hebrew developed unique abilities in its poetic form and its ability to handle the ideas with subtlety and sensitivity that actually go far beyond what you could accomplish in English. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. And it gets more complicated though in Hebrew as well, because the earth and the man, these are all physical things, but Hebrew even uses it for kind of abstract ideas. So, like, and we're finally here, the word Satan in Hebrew. So the word Satan in Hebrew, it simply means adversary or accuser, someone who's standing against you. And everyone can be a Satan. God, Yahweh, is a Satan at numerous points in the Bible. Like when he's standing in the road of Balaam, I believe he's described as a Satan. That's a rather strange way to think about it. But the figure in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that we know as Satan is actually Ha-Satan. He's the adversary, the accuser. So that seems normal. That it's a kind of title in the divine council, perhaps that some being takes up. We might read on face value in the English, but if we take it into consideration that if Ha'aretz is all the lands put together, and Ha-Adam is all the men put together into mankind, Ha-Satan is like the enemy of enemies,
Right.
the ultimate enemy in that way. And
yeah, and the narrative is, I mean, I remember people getting very excited about the Jordan Peterson interpretation of Genesis and not knowing quite what to make of it, because in a sense he could be taken as trying to supersede a primitive literalistic reading and making it more modern, and I don't like the sound of that. However, in another sense, what you're saying, I think you can also feel in the narrative that there is a deep, like, symbology to the events that are happening, whether or not they were literal, and that this is a story of mankind and accuser as symbol, like,
absolutely,
coming
and
together.
I think what people need to understand in this kind of that it's not a debate between is it symbolic or is it literal. Again, Jonathan Pajot hits a lot on this, is that it's both. Things can be literal. God created the world. That's literally true as far as we believe. But who cares? What does it mean that God created the world? What does it mean that we are made in the image?
Yeah.
And what does it mean that the enemy is a serpent? And we're going to get
And
into that in a minute.
the things that are preserved in the earliest stories, we're told, are not trivia. They're sort of the opposite of trivia. Trivia
Exactly,
would
yeah.
be something like, it was 4:00 in the afternoon. Well, who cares exactly what time it is? But every detail in those accounts carries weight and is significant beyond just, adding a kind of dull realism to the story.
Yes, certainly. So I think maybe we should get to our first verses. And would you mind using Bible Hub? Because I want to look at the
Sure.
interlinear. I want to look
What?
at the interlinear
Yes.
for some of these.
Great. What should I look up first?
Genesis 6:5.
Do you want me to start with an interlinear?
No, let's just start with like a normal translation. But
Okay.
I'm going to look at the interlinear later.
Great. Sorry, share screen. Do we need audio? No. I'm going to argue.
The word does speak to us.
Here you go. Every possible translation you could imagine. I guess they put NIV at the top. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thought of the human heart was only evil all the time.
Very powerful words. And now if we also look at Genesis 8, verse 21.
The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done."
So what we see here is we see the same phrase repeated. And what these two verses are, Genesis 6:5, is before the flood, directly before the flood. And it is God giving his reason for the flood. This is why I'm doing this. And the same phrase follows at the end of the flood when Noah lands on Mount Ararat and he makes a sacrifice to God. He smells the aroma and he says this phrase again. And he said, "I won't curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood." Now, this phrase in Hebrew is Yetzer Lev Ha-Adam Ra in Genesis 8:21.
Concise.
Very, very concise, yeah. So Yetzer is the word for inclination. It's kind of like desire, but you're thinking about the object of your desire. It's like impulse. It's the conception of what you desire in your head. Lev is the word for heart. Ha-Adam, as we know, is mankind, or it's the man. And Ra is the word for evil.
So bring up the interlinear so we can have a look at this.
Yes, sure thing.
Okay, is this it?
Yes. Yetzer Lev Ha Adam Ra. That is it. The imagination in the heart of man is evil. And now this is
okay.
Now, in the Everett Fox translation, which you turned me onto, he has a footnote on this verse in which he says that it's a kind of poetic contrast to what God says in the beginning of creation, where he says he saw it and it was good, and this is contrasting that at the end where it's evil, it's pure evil. But this phrase, Yetzer Lev Ha Adam Ra, is very important in Judaism. It's not just some other verse. It gets shortened into a concept, Yetzer Hara, the idea of evil or the evil inclination. And it is their concept of how we are drawn to evil. And they have a twin concept, which is Yetzer HaTov, which is the good inclination. And maybe you've heard the term Mazel Tov.
Yes.
That's good day or something like that, yeah. So the word Tov is good.
Do they say? I think of Jewish people saying that as a celebration.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. So they're celebrating the goodness of the day. If I make sure I get the right translation of Mazel Tov. Yes, it's used to express happiness for a significant occasion or event. It means good fortune. There you go. So Jews have these two concepts of Yetzer Hara and Yetzer HaTov, and it comes from this phrase which bookends the story of the flood. It says it before, he says it after, that the inclination of the heart of man is evil. And you read the translation and it sounds like God is saying that the inclination of man's heart is one of the evil things, but it's taken in Judaism that it's saying that it is evil. It is the evil. Yetzer Hara, the evil. And they identify this figure with the Satan, the adversary, which gets mentioned later on in Genesis. Well, not in Genesis, later on in the Old Testament, rather. This is what they identify as the evil one, is the Yetzer Hara.
So, in a way, this verse could be taken as saying that the heart of man is the devil, or is that too extreme to push it that far? It's like the evil one is identified in the heart of man, and therefore God was going to destroy everything.
Yes, well, I'm gonna connect that up to it in a minute.
Sure.
So one of let me see. Yes, well, if we look at the verse Deuteronomy, in book 10 of Deuteronomy, verse 16, I believe it is. This is Moses telling us to circumcise our heart. Circumcision of the heart. This is always a very interesting phrase to people, but he's referring to the Yetzer Hara. He's referring to the Yetzer Hara when he says this.
So he says, no longer be stiff-necked, and of your heart circumcise the foreskin. Right?
Yeah. Therefore circumcise the foreskin of your heart.
Uh-huh. So this is therefore circumcise. Is there some preposition that means therefore attached to the beginning of the word circumcise here? Sorry, I've suddenly got fascinated in Hebrew as a language, as you can imagine.
Yes, well, my Hebrew is not much better than yours. I'm no philosopher, but
we'll get there together.
There may very well be.
Yeah. Okay. So circumcise the foreskin of your heart, meaning, the circumcision was part of the ritual by which you showed your allegiance to God and became pure. And it's saying, do that to your heart. But we just saw heart. The heart of man was evil. So
yes.
Is that go on, make the connection.
So the like I said, the concept in Judaism is a twin concept. There is the evil inclination and the good inclination. And so what Moses is telling you is to make your heart pure, to circumcise the evil part of your heart, the evil inclination, get rid of that. Now, there are some sort of rabbinic doctrines on the Yetzer Hara that say you should use both of these things, that they're both a part of you, and that you should follow the sort of middle path, as it were. And that both things should be rendered unto God and all of these things, which is an interesting thought, but
it's like presumably the foreskin is seen as unclean. So it's almost like the verse we just looked at was saying, like, their hearts were all foreskin. Like there was they circumcised their hearts, there'd be nothing left.
Well, yes, perhaps, and that's the reason why all those that drowned in the flood were destroyed, because their hearts were purely evil.
Yeah.
Apart from Noah and the ones that he saved, and so this is all very psychological. We're thinking about it as these kind of psychological drives. We're driven to do evil and we're driven to do good in different aspects of ourselves, but that's not very religious. It sounds to me like it's kind of like Jordan Peterson on a lower level. Like, you believe in God, but everything else is just psychology or something like that. And I'd like to make it into something a little more expansive, and I'd like to dig out this quote from St. Gregory of Nyssa. There is a doctrine which derives its trustworthiness from the tradition of the fathers, which says that after our nature fell into sin, God did not disregard our fall and withhold his providence. No, on the one hand, he appointed an angel with an incorporeal nature to help in the life of each person, and on the other hand, he also appointed the corrupter, who, by an evil and maleficent demon, afflicts the life of man and contrives against our nature. And so what is this? This is the angel and the devil on the shoulder. That's that tradition, but it's a real Christian tradition. And that is a continuation of the ideas of the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hatov, the good inclination and the evil inclination, but it's saying there is spirit in that, and that there is a guardian angel and there is a corruptor on each side of us. And so we might think about where the Yetzer Hara also shows up, and it shows up because it's a kind of concept. It shows up in the New Testament kind of implicitly, as it were. So I believe the verse is Romans 8. If we go to Romans 8.
Yeah.
And we read in
Whole
verse
thing?
4. We read in verses 4 and verse 6. We can see that Paul is talking about the evil inclination and the good inclination there.
I guess we don't need the interlinear at this point.
Yeah, not quite anymore.
But it's quite fun, isn't it?
It is so fun.
Okay, shall I find a proper translation? All right, let's go back to here we are, 4 to 6, did you say? Shall I read it?
4 and 6, yeah. Sure thing.
Okay. So that the righteous standards of the law might be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. The mind of the flesh is death, but the mind of the Spirit is life and peace. And verse 4 starts halfway through a thought, but we may have to go back to the beginning of the chapter, or possibly the beginning of Romans, to really know where he's jumping in at. But he's saying Jesus was sent so that the righteous standards of the law might be fulfilled in us. And then he's saying, who is us? It's those walking according to the Spirit. The mind of the flesh is death, but the mind of the Spirit is life and peace.
So I can say pretty definitely that there are Hebrew translations of Romans in which Yetzer Hatov and Yetzer Hara is used here.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah. And
so the mind of the flesh and the mind of the Spirit.
Yes, and it's pretty clear that what Paul is writing about here is these two inclinations implicitly, but he's writing them in another language.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So he's familiar with the Hebrew that we were just looking at, but he's writing in Greek. So he's like, I wish I could just use the Hebrew words here, but mind of flesh. That's pretty good translation.
Yes. The concept was a core part of Jewish philosophy, and so he's bringing that to us through Romans.
You can see how people ended up falling into the heresies that the body and physical matter is evil and the spiritual matter is good. When you read verses like this, can't you?
Yes. And another part where the Yetzer Hara might turn up is, I was watching that stream with you and Radlib where you talked about Hebrew poetry and the couplets, and that a verse might say something and then the next line will restate it.
Yes.
And I thought about the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. What's the last line of it? Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And I was thinking perhaps that is a couplet describing the Yetzer Hara, connecting temptation and evil into one thing, which is very interesting.
Yes.
And so
so lead us away from temptation, and then repeat it with the same words, deliver us from evil. And therefore, being delivered and being led away are the same idea, and temptation and evil are the same idea.
Evil and temptation are the same thing, yes. Which is very interesting, but people can take it or leave it. The evil is likened to be thought about as a kind of abstract entity in the form of Satan. You know, there's this kind of dualism that Satan is like the god of hell, and he's got all his minions there, he's got his armies, and he's the sort of maintainer of this abstract force called evil, and then you're tempted towards it. But saying that the temptation is with you, that it's in your heart, that's a rather different path of conceiving of the devil, and I want to kind of build on that from here on out. So I would say,
So
why don't we?
in this verse, we've got the mind of flesh and the mind of the spirit, versus in the Old Testament more commonly the heart, and it was the heart of evil, the heart, man's evil imagination, and then the reverse of that being, so mind and heart being, again, pictures pointing towards the same thing. Is that fair?
Yeah,
Okay,
certainly.
great.
And if I look at yes, so if we get back to Satan now, I say we take a look at Genesis 3. Why don't we?
Hello, Genesis 3. We knew it was coming. Serpent.
So before this stream, both me and Lambda watched a podcast called The Lord of Spirits, and their episode called The Five-ish Falls of Angels covers this verse, and it goes deep into the Hebrew, and I'm kind of going to be parroting the work of Father Stephen DeYoung. He's a quite excellent biblical scholar, and I recommend you go watch that episode after this one.
Yes, it's really good. I thoroughly enjoyed and learnt a lot, and have now intended to watch a bunch more episodes of this podcast. It's great.
It certainly is, and one of the connections he makes here is that when the serpent is cursed in 3:14. Well, actually, the first connection I should make in terms of Eden is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, as we covered already, good and evil in Hebrew is tov and ra. And when they eat the fruit, they gain knowledge of good and evil. And in other words, they desire the fruit. They had a yetzer for it. And as we talked about, yetzer is kind of like the connection, the imagination of the object of desire. So what we see in Hebrew philosophy is that the eating of the fruit in the Garden of Eden is the origin of the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hatov in the heart of men, and that leads to their fall. And so Father Stephen DeYoung in this verse 3:14, he makes the connection that the serpent is cursed to eat dust all of his life. And so this kind of upsets the literalist interpretation, and that there were snakes with legs and all of these things. But he says that in the context of the verse, in the context of the chapter rather, where Adam and Eve's curse is that for dust they are, and to dust they shall return. The serpent is being cursed to eat dust. So what's happening here is that the devil is being made the Lord of Death. And you look at iconography, and you see the mouth of Hades as this kind of serpentine mouth that's swallowing all of the dead at the Last Judgment. And here we see it's literally here. He's being made the Lord of Death. You shall eat dust.
Because God is the only one who can really create, and he takes the dust and forms life out of it. And all living creatures eat, be it plant or animal, they're eating something that's alive, and yet here the creature is being consigned back to the thing to which human beings are sent after they die.
Father Stephen has a great line on this in the episode. He says that here God is making the devil the Lord of nothing, and in the end he takes even that away from him. This is his kingdom of dust and ashes. So that is the serpent being made the Lord of Death. But well, what is the serpent? I suppose. What is the serpent? And what's interesting is that the word for serpent here is nakash, hanakash, specifically the serpent. And now, this is interesting because it's not, as we said, Hebrew can get pretty arbitrary at times. Now, what if I told you there were 3 ways of reading this word without the vowel points?
The vowel points being like these little extra, like the squiggle
Yes,
here and the T and the little line under here.
Yeah, they sort of specify what the word is, whereas it's kind of arbitrary without them. But there are 3 words. There are 3 versions of nakash that mean 3 different things. Now, the serpent is the first of them.
Yeah.
But there is another meaning which is used throughout the book of Daniel for nakash, which is bronze.
Ooh.
Bronze or brass. And if you use that as an adjective, it becomes something like the shining one or the brazen one.
Aha. Like
One
bronzed in English means to kind
Yes.
of make it glow.
I am like the brazen, basically.
Yes.
Is what Hanahash could be read as. And shining is constantly associated with divinity. And the other reading of nakash is the diviner. You read it as a verb, as a substantive verb, that someone is doing something. It means diviner.
As in to make something divine.
No, as in like divination.
Oh, diviner, like trying to find something out. Like
yes,
divining for water. Ah, I see.
Yes. So this is a good point to say. What is the difference between divination and prophecy? And the answer is that divination is taken and prophecy is given. They're both ways of seeing the future, of gaining divine knowledge, but divination is banned by Mosaic law because it takes, it does not receive by grace. And this is the problem that we're going to see consistently with the devil, is that what he does is to try to take. He tries to take from the divine. And so reading this all together and sort of consing these together, it might seem arbitrary now, but I'm going to show how it's not so it would not have been so arbitrary to the writer, which was Moses, of these verses. And so reading it all together, we have a snake, we have a shining one, and we have a kind of magician, someone who performs tricks. Now, the literalist interpretation reads it, and this is partly the problem of sort of translating out of these contexts, is that to our English reader, this might seem okay, it's just a talking snake, basically. But it's a lot more nuanced than that in the Hebrew, and there's a lot of that, like you talked about earlier with the looking at just one verse. There becomes a lot more complexity into the meaning of what this nakash is. And so if we get on with it, if you want to go to Numbers 21.
Which verse?
Verses 4 to 9. So this is you might want to go to the normal translation for this.
Okay.
Just so we can read it out first.
Yeah. I'm not sure how to switch between translations.
Just press NIV or something on the top bar.
Where,
on the blue bar.
How do I get back to... Because I always just end up going back to Google. Oh, Interlin right here.
Yeah,
there we go. Great. So NIV. Okay.
So if we read verses 4 to 9, this is the story of when the snakes attacked the Israelites due to their lack of faith.
Mhm.
And Moses was told by God to make a serpent and put it up on a pole, and this saves them. Now,
Shall I
this
read
is
it?
very yeah, sure.
Great. So they traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom, but the people grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. Then, when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived.
Very interesting, given what we've just read. What we've just read.
Indeed.
Yes.
Presumably,
So,
this is like the same word twice in Hebrew or
it
something.
actually is. It's a wordplay. It's Nakash, Nakoshet,
Let's
or
have a
something like
look.
that.
This is exciting. Oh, hang on, I need to make the window full screen to get the interlin button to appear. Here we are.
So verse 9.
Oh, it's only showing me verse 1.
You can actually, if you edit the URL and take out the -1 in it, it should give you the full verse in interlinear, the full chapter rather.
Sorry, which verse did you say it was? 9.
Number 9.
I'll just find it the manual way. Here we are. Serpent. That's why I couldn't find snake.
Right. LaRue's kind of preempted us on this.
Of course, LaRue's always 5 or 6 steps ahead.
Okay, so as we see, it's it's Hanakash Hanahoset there, and the word
Okay.
there, as you can see, is the same letters. So the word for bronze is being used twice as a Nakash and Nakoshet.
This, I see. The arrow keys work backwards in backwards written languages, it turns out. How confusing. So these 3 letters are the same as these 3 letters for serpent.
Yes, it's the same word. It's from the brazen meaning, the brazen definition of the word Nakash.
And then you've got this extra letter at the end of the word.
Yes, and something rather interesting is going on here, because specifically what God sent among them in the NIV that we read, it was venomous snakes, but the word, what it says literally is sort of fiery snakes or burning snakes, and the word for fire is, the word for fiery is saraf.
Okay.
So what you have is a hanahasim ha seraphim, and if I say seraphim, which is the plural of saraf, that's perhaps lighting up some bells. So what we find in Isaiah 6 is that the seraphim, the burning ones, and specifically Isaiah refers to them as fiery flying serpents. Now that doesn't sound so much like it's a literal snake anymore, although it has the characteristics of a snake. But these are divine beings, these seraphim, these flying serpents, and in Isaiah 6, they are guardians of the throne of God, one of the classes of the angels. And so what God says in this story, specifically to Moses, is make a saraf. He doesn't say make a serpent, he says make a saraf. And then Moses goes and makes a bronze nakash. So what is happening here is that the Israelites, are being saved not through some action against the serpents, but by having their attention drawn to the image of an angel. And this is kind of strange for like iconoclasts who might think, "Oh, icons! I thought we were getting rid of all these idols." But here we see, look at the image of an angel,
Yeah.
and you will be saved. Orient yourself towards the divine. And as LaRue brought up in John 3:14, Jesus likens himself to the bronze serpent made by Moses that must be raised up.
Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, thus it behooves the Son to be lifted up of man.
The Son of Man to be lifted up.
Yes.
Yes. So Jesus is likening
Yes.
himself to this bronze serpent, this image of an angel. And of course, this might bring up, rather unseemly non-Trinitarian reasons that Jesus is saying that he's an angel. But of course, he's an angel. He's the angel of the Lord, as in Genesis.
We'll check in with LaRue on his interpretation of that.
Oh, I'm going to upset LaRue a lot more by the time this stream is over. So,
yeah. Okay, but I'm just thinking about, we've got all these references to snakes. We've got snakes attacking the people of Israel, and they're fiery, which is interpreted as being venomous. But fiery snakes perhaps is a description of something that's difficult to put into words. And then you're holding up an image of something that's described as a bronzed snake. But given that we know elsewhere the implications of the snake in the Garden of Eden and the seraphim, that perhaps that sculpture also carried known reference to it being a sculpture of an angel. And we know that there were angels in the Ark of the Covenant, so the idea of sculpting a heavenly being is not out of the question. It just throws, to me, question marks over everything. What's being described here?
We're going to see something very
mysterious.
interesting in a moment with this bronze serpent. But what we can conclude from this is that the serpent in the garden was an angel. He was perhaps a seraphim in some way, but the kind of the scholarly
a fallen angel,
a fallen angel, yes.
Yes.
And what we're going to find is that this bronze serpent is something quite interesting happens to him in a rather obscure verse. So if we go to 2 Kings 18, 2 Kings 18 verses. Verse 4, 2 Kings 18 verse 4.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is in the reign of King Hezekiah.
So he removed the high places and broke the sacred pillars. He cut down the wooden images and broke into pieces the bronze serpent that had been. Sorry, how do I pass this? Sorry, I'll go back to a proper translation rather than doing it myself. Verse 4. He removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. He broke into pieces the bronze snake that Moses had made, for up till that time, the Israelites had been burning incense to it. Ooh, interesting.
It was called Nehushtan. And Nehushtan is again coming from the word Nakash. And it means either the great serpent or the great brass, the great bronze, or something like that.
Yes.
And it's Hezekiah that names it this here. And so what this is telling us is that this angel that was, this is about 1,000 years or something have passed between the time of Moses and the time of this. And the Israelites have kept that bronze serpent that Moses made all this time as a kind of artifact. And now this angel this image of an angel is being worshipped as an idol
as an idol.
by the Israelites. They're burning incense to it, and so it's a fallen angel that has taken worship to itself.
Yeah, interesting that I mean, you mentioned iconoclasm. Moses formed this thing, and it was effective. It got rid of, or it healed the. Was that what happened when people were bitten? Then they would be healed if they looked at the snake.
It was specifically that those who looked upon the bronze serpent who had been bitten would not die, and that's why Jesus likens himself to this serpent. But this verse is perhaps very unsettling, or in the case of LaRue, very exciting, and that Jesus is likening himself to an angel that should not be worshipped. So,
and in this case, like the model of the snake that was being worshipped was not itself an angel, right? It was a picture of an angel.
It was an image of an angel, like an icon.
Yeah. Okay.
But the point of it for God to do was to have the Israelites look upon the divine.
And I suppose Jesus is the image of the invisible God. So
exactly, yeah. And so Jesus isn't just any angel, he's the angel of the Lord, which is why he's different. And so from all this, we can kind of safely conclude that the serpent in the garden was not just any normal serpent. As in Isaiah 6, like we mentioned, the seraphim are fiery, flying serpents. That doesn't sound like a normal serpent. The kind of scholarly derivation of the seraphim is that it comes from Egyptian tradition. You see the Egyptian crowns with the snakes on them, and the uraeus headdress that makes like Tutankhamun look like a cobra. In fact, there are I believe golden sculptures in Tutankhamun's tomb of serpents with wings, and these beings
somebody's just pointed out. Sorry, carry on.
Oh, right. These beings in Egyptian tradition are these flying serpents, are in fact the throne guardians. They guard the throne of the pharaoh, and they are like divine beings, and they are kind of like the counterparts to the cherubim, who come from a kind of more Babylonian tradition of these winged hybrids.
Sorry, somebody just pointed out that the logo of the WHO is a snake.
Yeah, the caudicus. Yeah.
Sorry.
It comes from this story with Moses, and that he healed the people.
It's a symbol of healing.
But as I'm sure people can read the fine print on that.
Well, given that you could argue that health systems have ended up being worshipped, it feels like quite a connection to make. We are holding up an organization and bowing down to its every whim.
Yes, not many people know about this ending to the story with the bronze serpent, but really completes the picture, as it were. So, and let me just look at my plan, see where we are. Okay, so I think it's time we look at.
I think having got as far as the WHO, we've reached it, haven't we?
Yes,
we've discovered Satan.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
So we should look at Deuteronomy 32.
Okay.
And let's look at the translation. Okay. So if we go to verse 8 here.
When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel.
Now, this is very interesting. Someone asked in the chat earlier to look at sort of mistranslations of the Hebrew. So this will be quite interesting and controversial. But to begin, I want to state two rather uncontroversial things. Is
Okay.
that demons are fallen angels, one, and two, pagan gods are demons. I don't think that's very controversial to anyone to say here. Okay, so the context of this verse, when the Most High divided the nations, he's talking about the Tower of Babel, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When God divided the nations, right? But
Mm-hmm.
he divided the nations according to the number of the sons of Israel. Now, this,
Yes.
but it says of God here, which is interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
this translation of Israel comes from the Masoretic text, the rabbinic Hebrew.
Okay.
But in the Septuagint, it says Angelon Theou, which is the angels of God. So
Okay.
what exactly is being said here? And come to find, when the Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered, i.e. the earlier Hebrew, it does not say B'nai Yisrael here. It says B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, and that is the angels. The sons of God are angels. I know there are some people who dispute this, but it seems rather obvious here, and that what God is doing here in the Tower of Babel story, like I believe he says, "Let us go down and confuse the language." He's talking about the divine
Mm.
council. He's talking to the
Mm.
divine council. We're going to go down and we're going to split the nations up, and he numbers the peoples according to the number of. He splits the boundaries of the nations according to the number of the sons of God. So what he's doing is, for each nation, he's giving them an angel to rule. Yes,
And
like
then
the beginning of
the
your
people later ask for a king of their own. They want their own false angel to rule over them.
Yes, and one of the things Father De Young brings up is that the word Babel is Babili in Sumerian or Akkadian or something like that, and it means gate of the gods. You think of the ziggurat in Babylonian cities. What was that for? It was a temple, as a kind of artificial holy mountain upon which you meet with the gods, and
Hmm.
you sort of fraternize with them. And
So, in
so,
a way, having tried to create the Tower of Babel, the nations went their own separate ways and each made their own small version of the Tower of Babel for their own individual god.
well,
Um,
we have to understand that the full picture. So, the Tower of Babel follows directly after the flood, and so it becomes rather obvious why people would build a massive tower reaching as high as possible directly after a flood had just covered the world, right? You want to get above the flood. You don't want that to happen again, and so they're
yeah.
reaching towards God, and in a place called Babel, the gate of the gods. But and this time, people are still, the presence of God is still with the people, so they're going to our God, to Yahweh, and they want to reach Him with this, through this artificial process of building the tower, and they want to be in heaven essentially with God and escape the flood. But in doing that, they're they kind of they inadvertently destroy themselves. And Pajot talks about this in the way that the Tower of Babel is kind of like an inversion of the holy mountain
Hmm.
upon which Moses and the Israelites encounter God. Because at the bottom of the mountain, the Israelites were baking bricks for the Egyptians,
Hmm.
whereas at the top of the Tower of Babel, the bricks are being laid.
Hmm. Yes. So the mountain is the place that people ascend that God created, and when they get to the top, they meet with God. Whereas the false temples constructed by man's hands, you ascend, trying to create an alternative, a different, hoping to find something, different deity at the top. It's like a is that what you mean by an inversion? Because they're both
Yes.
still going up, but one of them is God's way, which was already existed. The mountain was there, and the other was. Go on.
If we think about it like this, where is the bottom of a mountain?
The sea.
Yes, exactly. So as we come down from a mountain, it's not really obvious where the mountain ends and the land begins.
Yeah.
But it's just like you fall and you fall. And one thing that's important to understand about the Garden of Eden is that it's on a mountain. And this is stated as such in Ezekiel, I believe, and we'll get to a verse on that. But
that's really interesting. And imagine the views from the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, we fall. It would be amazing, yes. But we fall and we fall from the mountain.
Yeah.
Where is the end of the mountain? And it's the flood. It's the sea level. God sets a limit to our fall, and that we land in the ocean.
And so, Philopocrat mentioned about the ocean being, the anyway. I'm making more connections than we could possibly fit in one stream.
Yes,
let's carry on.
Well, in short, the flood is the image of chaos. It's total turbulence. Everything is destroyed. And so, if we follow the same logic, we say, what is the top of a mountain? We kind of go and go, but what is it? It's the image of total order. It's God. God is at the top of the mountain. And you see throughout Scripture, over and over again, all of the prophets encounter God at the top of a mountain. From Moses to Noah to Ezekiel, or not Ezekiel, Elijah.
And we see an association of truth and of light and of goodness, and then at the top of the mountain you can see everything. You get that God's eye perspective, the view from above. There's such consonance between these concepts.
Yes, and finally, ultimately, Jesus is crucified on the hill of Golgotha, and the Sermon on the Mount of Olives, the Mount of Transfiguration. Everything sort of conforms to the mountain, which is like an image of hierarchy. And so in building the Tower of Babel, which would have been a ziggurat for the Babylonians, it's a kind of pyramid. It's an artificial mountain in which they seek to call down God. And there is a verse on this which Paul talks about, I believe. Let's see, where does he have it?
Romans 10:6.
Romans 10:6, you think?
Well, I don't know where you're trying to go, but I want to go here. This is about who will ascend into heaven. That is. Let's go back is this what you meant?
Yeah, this is the one. Yeah.
But the righteous that is by faith say, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven, that is to bring Christ down, or who will descend into the deep, that is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? And then it goes on to say, the word is in you, it is in your mouth and in your heart. So yes, the concept that who will ascend into heaven, that is to bring Christ down. Now, can you explain this?
So this is kind of, if we take that, and of course there's the heart imagery there as well. Do not say in your heart. This is kind of in reference to the Tower of Babel, is it not? Who will ascend into heaven? You'll bring God down, and we can.
It kind of implies. Am I understanding this correctly? That the idea of Babel, the tower they were building, was like, this is a place that will be considered worthy for the gods to come down and visit us. Like,
yes, it's kind of like a technological. Them. It's like a technological sort of summoning place in which, through our own strength and ingenuity and our sheer work, we're going to ascend to heaven. It's like a material, artificial mountain of God.
It's like putting up a flag and saying, come and visit us. We are in the heavens literally because we're up in the sky, but also the implication being that the gods are, even above that, but they will, if you've ascended, they will come down and visit you.
Yes, and to what I said earlier, what is the difference between divination and prophecy? Divination is taken and prophecy is given. This is the same thing. You can only approach heaven by God's grace. That is, He invites you up the mountain. You can't
Is there not
take it.
is there not a psalm that talks about who shall ascend to the hill of the Lord? Who, the one that has clean hands and a pure heart.
Yes, yes. I mean, this
this
is
is this responding to that psalm, in fact, and saying, actually, it's a bit like when Jesus talks to the woman at the well, and she says, where should we worship? And Jesus says, actually, there's a time coming where you'll worship in spirit and truth. And in this case, the word has spread. It's like the whole concept of the curtain ripping in two is like, we're no longer living in that ancient world in which God is localized to the nation of Israel. No longer are you ascending to bring Christ down. Am I making these connections correctly?
Yes, I think so.
Thank you.
And if we go back to Deuteronomy 32 and look at this time verses 17 to 19.
They sacrificed to false gods, which are not God, gods they had not known, gods that recently appeared, gods your ancestors did not fear. Where are we going to? To 19. You deserted the rock who fathered you. You forgot the God who gave you birth. The Lord saw this and rejected them because he was angered by his sons and daughters.
Okay, so
this is music to the ears of any traditionalists.
Absolutely, yeah. And the connection that Father Stephen de Young made, and the connection I'm going to make here, is that he's still talking about the Tower of Babel. As you see with the language, he was angered by his sons of daughters. You think back to Genesis 6, where the sons of God had relations with the daughters of men. He's still talking about the sons of God that were mentioned earlier in verse 8 of this, and that these angels who he had appointed to sort of administer to the nations, to each of the nations, people began to sacrifice to them, like the bronze snake of Moses was sacrificed to the Nehushtan. Yeah. They began to sacrifice to them, and they became the pagan gods. And
as an aside, the Ten Commandments, when they're preached on, often go through do not sacrifice to false idols, and then the application will be, well, what's an idol in your life? Is it an idol to you that you would skip church to go and watch a pop concert or something? And I wonder whether that is to trivialize the reality of some of the idolatry going on in the times of Israel was effective. Like there was genuine spiritual evil powers that it wasn't just superstition in the sense of believing a piece of wood was real. It was, no, there's actual false spirits that will give you things if you obey their commands. As it would be like if you preached on Jesus being tempted by the devil and said, well, obviously Jesus thought there was a devil, but he was a bit stupid. Do you know what I mean? The idols that people were worshipping may have had actual demonic power, been. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, and
this is a bit of an aside, but yes.
What this verse is literally saying happened is that the Tower of Babel was the creation of paganism, and that God appointed the angels, and the angels literally fell and became the pagan gods by accepting sacrifice from the people, and the people of the nations began to sacrifice to them. And so it's not superstition here at all. It's not like Jordan Peterson's psychology. Not to denigrate it at all. It's he's an incredible thinker, but this is real. This is what has happened in the past, and it's happening now, whether people realize it or not. And so, just as Satan fell, as the bronze serpent fell, as Moses' bronze serpent fell, these angels that God appointed to the nations fell also and became paganism. And so this is a good model for people who have difficulty when, say, for example, an atheist might bring up, well, why your gods, or how there might be this kind of relativism in terms of how do you deal with the fact that there are competing narratives, and this incorporates it. It explains to you what these other gods are, and you can start to find it in the stories of these gods, which we'll go on to do. And if it's about time, yes, in my plan, we should check out Isaiah 14.
This is like being on a day trip with you.
Yes,
You got
we're
a
on
plan?
a journey. We're on a journey.
Sorry, Isaiah 18, did you say?
14. And so we might want to read this whole thing. It's a bit long. So what is happening here is that Isaiah is given a prophecy about the fall of Babylon. And so we should start at verse 3 and read on from there.
To the end of the chapter?
Just to the end of the prophecy, which is about like...
Okay.
32.
Do you want to read this one?
Sure thing. So I'm reading the NIV version, I think.
I think that's what I've
On
got.
the day that the Lord gives you rest from your pain and torment, and from the hard labor into which you were forced, you will sing this song of contempt against the king of Babylon. How the oppressor has ceased, and how his fury has ended. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers. It struck the people in anger with unceasing blows. It subdued the nations in rage with relentless persecution. All the earth is at peace and at rest. They break out in song. Even the cypresses and cedars of Lebanon exult over you. Since you have been laid low, no woodcutter comes against us. Sheol beneath is eager to meet you upon your arrival. It stirs the spirits of the dead to greet you, all the rulers of the earth. It makes all kings of the nations rise from their thrones. They will all respond to you, saying, you have become weak as we are. You have become like us. Your pomp has been brought down to Sheol, along with the music of your harps. Maggots are your bed, and worms are your blanket. How you have fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. You have been cut down to the ground, O destroyer of nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you will be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. To those who see you will stare. They will ponder your fate. Is this the man that shook the earth and made the kingdoms tremble, who turned the world into a desert and destroyed its cities, who refused to let the captives return to their homes? All the kings of the nations lie in a state, each in his own tomb, but you are cast out of the grave like a rejected branch, covered by those slain with the word, and dumped into a rocky pit like a carcass trampled underfoot. You will not join them in burial, since you have destroyed your land and slaughtered your own people. The offspring of the wicked will never again be mentioned. Prepare a place to slaughter his sons for the iniquities of their forefathers. They will never rise up to possess a land or cover the earth with their cities. I will rise up against them, declares the Lord of hosts. I will cut off from Babylon her name and her remnant, her offspring and her posterity. I will make her a place for owls and for swamplands. I will sweep her away with the broom of destruction, declares the Lord of hosts. And so this entire prophecy is taken to refer to the pagan god, the Most High God of Babylon, to the king also in like a material sense, but also to the god of Babylon, its divine ruler, the fallen angel. And specifically in verse 12, if we go to verse 12, this is translated, the word morning star, I'm sure everyone is familiar, is translated as Lucifer by St. Jerome.
Let's go back to interlinear, shall we? I've got to just start absorbing Hebrew, I think. Just pure exposure is going to help, is my theory. So here we are.
Yes. So
how you're fallen
this
from
person-
heaven, Lucifer, son of the morning.
This person in this verse is Hillel ben Shakar, which is Hillel, son of Shakar. And Shakar was, I believe, the Canaanite god of dawn. And Hillel was one of his sons. And Father de Young has a rather interesting point on this, in that St. Jerome gets Lucifer not from Hillel, but from the Book of Enoch, in which the Satan, before he fell, is the light bearer, and he translates that into Latin as Lucifer, Lucifer being the morning star. And so in this being the morning star, it's a kind of divine, it has the context of being a divine being, not just a material king on earth, the king of Babylon. And so directly following this, we have the 5 I wills. And if we take this as Satan, we can read that these are the 5 goals of Satan. So
LaRue in chat is saying, this is so wrong. Read verse 4. It's talking about the king of Babylon.
I know it is. It is talking about the king of Babylon, but the king on earth of Babylon is separate from the king, the divine king of Babylon, the spiritual king of Babylon, which is the god of Babylon as well. And we see this again, time and time again, that the king, I mean, oftentimes you see with these ancient civilizations is that their king is in fact syncretized with the gods as well. The pharaoh was the representation of Osiris Horus on earth, and the king of Babylon himself too was normally a hybrid, a kind of demigod between the god of his city and Ishtar and his own father, his human father. He's like a 2/3 hybrid. And so it's not so black and white in these ancient texts between kingship and divinity. And certainly this is taken traditionally to also refer to Satan influencing the actions of Babylon in the world. And so if we look at the I wills, which are in verses 13 to 14, it says, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. And these are rather famous, and this is the kind of talk that we would expect from the fallen angels and also from the people of Babel, who before this built the Tower of Babel many thousands of years before this to ascend to the heavens. And spiritually here, Lucifer, the son of morning, is attempting to ascend to the throne of God. The stars of God being the angels here as well. And so I believe somewhere here, in Ezekiel 28, if we go to there, we get a very similar passage. And this is a prophecy by Ezekiel against the king of Tyre. And it's far more explicit about the divine nature of this ruler of Tyre. And it says here, I believe in verse 14, you were anointed as a guardian cherub, for I have ordained you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked among the fiery stones. From the day you were created, you were blameless in your ways until wickedness was found in you. By the vastness of your trade, you were filled with violence and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mountain of God, and I banished you, O guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones. Your heart grew proud of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor, so I cast you to the earth. I made you a spectacle before kings. And so this is more explicitly about a divine creature, while also referring to a king on earth.
We heard about seraphim earlier in the stream, and now here we are with cherubim.
Yes. And like I said, the cherubs are somewhat the counterparts of the seraphim, in that they are also throne guardians. And in the biblical tradition, they hold up the throne of God. The throne of God is upon the cherubim. But cherubs come from a Babylonian tradition of throne guardian deities as well. And so,
yeah, so I guess the objection coming from LaRue is that these gods are not real.
his objection is the same as his objection for the divinity of Jesus, in that a king cannot be a representative of a god.
Okay.
So whatever, I suppose you have to take your side and stick to it on that issue. That could be a discussion for a whole nother time. But certainly, this is what the ancient people who this book was wrote for believed.
Okay. And for the sake of this stream, we will work with that as axiomatic, then, that it is in fact possible for a king to stand in as a representative of a higher being.
Well, we'll put it this way: the king can be separate from the god, although that was not always necessarily so, as I've said, in the ancient world. But still, this verse can be read in multiple ways, as referring to both the material king on earth and the spiritual king who is the God of the nation. Like we talked about with the angels in the Tower of Babel in Deuteronomy 32.
Do you think there are ways of reading the whole Bible consistently where it's, because I think I'm thinking about the spectrum of potential interpretation. You've got at one extreme very naturalistic readings wherein it's always pictorial about just the nature of humans. So Satan doesn't exist, but is describing the temptations that we face, and Adam didn't exist, but is representing all man. And then at the other end of the spectrum, then I guess what you might describe as extreme literalism, where every time something spiritual is described, all the way through the apocalyptic texts, it's always meaning explicit, specific beasts of the celestial realm, as it were. You've got creatures that actually in specific. I mean, we talked about the definite article. Is there are both of these at least self-consistent, and are we therefore looking at a balance of probabilities? Do we try to figure out how to, when we're putting together our theology? I feel like there's different approaches to take. How would you grapple with that range of opinions?
Well, the answer that I subscribe to is that it's both. This is all very literal, but it's also symbolic. It also means things, and there are many levels to reality, and we'll see some of this later. But if you think about it in terms of patterns, the
Yeah.
head of a man rules his body, the king of a people rules the people, a mountain rules the land, and a god rules the world.
Yeah.
It's all the same thing on many different levels. It's all macrocosm and microcosm.
So similar to what we were saying when we looked at Genesis, that you're saying it both does describe a literal individual called Adam, but also has this kind of symbolic overtone to it in addition.
Well, with respect to that, you can think about how did you originate? You were conceived in your mother's womb, which is a walled garden, in which you were naked in this walled garden, and you had no knowledge of good and evil, and everything was provided for you until you were forced out of this walled garden, and you arrived in the world, and you had
Yeah.
knowledge of good and evil, and you burst out crying because you had experienced the image of the fall. That's why birth. That's why when babies are born, they cry. And now, a sort of Jordan Peterson character or other sort of secular biblical scholars might read that and say, amazing. So finally we can explain that the Garden of Eden is just anecdote for birth. That's not the view that I subscribe to. I'm saying that at every level of reality, that the story of Eden is the origin of mankind, and it's not just like it's from birth and also the origin of Adam either. We see it in the Bible re-imaged. So, for example, after the flood, Noah on the mountain, he builds a vineyard, and he drinks he makes the grapes into wine, and he gets drunk, so he loses his knowledge of good and evil. The vineyard is a garden, and he falls asleep, so he falls into this kind of naivety. He closes his eyes. He goes into the tent, so in a sacred place, and he's naked as well. And so the whole garden is re-imaged again, and a new origin for mankind occurred, but on a lower level than that which occurred in the garden. So it's all a kind of fractal pattern that lays itself out across all of reality. This is the origin of things, in the same way that Revelations does.
Now, I just want to probe this. Sorry if I know we're tight on time because you've got a lot to cover, but I just wanted to probe this a little bit further. So LaRue is pointing that in New Testament it says, so then about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one. But even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or earth, as indeed there are many, quote, gods and many, quote, lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live. There is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. What do you think about that?
Well, this is absolutely true, but this does not invalidate the existence of other creatures. They are simply not gods. The fallen angels become gods when they accept sacrifices to them by the people, but only one divine being is deserving of worship, and that is God.
They're sort of standing in as God. And in the same way, you can't deny that there are lords, right? That
Yes, and
There's
this is
there's
so
only one person
fundamental.
to whom we should direct our praise, but there are many individual humans in the world to whom incorrect praise is directed. And in the same way as there's only one creator, sustainer, other beings, there's only, I guess God is the one whom you should praise, and gods are those who are praised in error.
Yes, and I mean it's so fundamental to the early Bible with the divine council and all these things. I mean, and the term Elohim literally means is the plural of God, and it's an intensive plural. To say something like God of gods, that is why the Most High God. And I don't know how you can read books like Exodus, for example, where God is in direct dialogue with the gods of Egypt, and he's talking about how he's gonna defeat them and all of these things. I don't know how you can read that if you think that these beings aren't real in any sense.
But I also I can't imagine that everything that has been treated as an idol throughout history has always had a genuine demonic spirit behind it. Maybe I should think that, but I just would have thought that there's plenty of examples of people constructing and praising a man-made object that is pure fiction.
Well, perhaps, but even in that action of worship and falsity, there is the evil inclination.
Yes.
There is human beings being led off of the true path, and that which leads us off of the true path is the Yetzer Hara, and like we're going to get onto, that is Satan.
Yeah. I'm just interested in because I've always I was brought up, I guess, believing that for example, the worship of Baal was, as this verse would suggest, the worship of nothing. But now I'm considering the possibility that actually the worship of Baal was the worship of a spirit who did exist.
Yes, I mean, I was brought up sort of implicitly in the same way that these gods didn't exist, but I read these verses and I'm forced to consider, now, idol is nothing at all in the world. That's true because it does not have authority. God is the only one with authority. But
nothing in the sense that it's a being eating dust, perhaps.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And we see this also with we talked earlier about the evil inclination and the good inclination. The good inclination is just something psychological, but if we extrapolate it to the highest level, what is the good inclination acting upon the whole world, the Ha level, the High-Rets level? What is it? It's the Holy Spirit, right? And so it follows that if we do the same extrapolation on the evil inclination, there is real spirit in that. There has to be.
Yeah. I guess I wouldn't want to pronounce as confidently one way or the other on this right now. Leroux, as ever, extremely self-assured in his interpretation, and I can see why he thinks the way that he does, but I'm not fully persuaded one way or the other, I guess.
I do understand. It certainly makes things a lot easier.
Yeah.
But I'm not like expressing things so assuredly. I'm presenting a theory. Like I said, I'm not dictating to the class. I'm presenting a school report, and you can tell me whether I've done a good job or not. People can take or leave the things that I'm saying here. I'm only presenting.
I think you're doing an
consideration.
Exceptional job. Should we carry on?
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Okay. So where should we go next? I suppose we'll get onto Leviathan. How about that?
Ooh, yeah.
So we should probably read Job 40 and 41.
The whole lot. I'm up for it.
Not all of it.
I used to say Job. I think Job was one of the first books of the Bible I used to say was my favorite book. I think Job is amazing.
It is incredible, and you read some of the poetry, the poetic language in these 2 chapters. It's really, really incredible. But first, we won't read all of it just for the sake of time. But what God is doing here is at the end of the book of Job, He's showing 2 beasts to Job. He's showing the beast of the earth and the beast of the sea. First of which is Behemoth, and I mentioned earlier how Elohim is an intensive plural, in that it's the plural of God in Aloha, so it's gods, but it's an intensive plural to say something like the super god, in a similar way to how Ha functioned earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
So Behemoth, and in Hebrew, Behemoth is a plural of Behemoth, and it's functioning in the same way, and that it is Behemoth means cattle or beast, something like that. So in the intensive plural form, Behemoth, it's like the beast of beasts, the ultimate
beast.
That's it, yeah. And so Behemoth, because of the context of Behemoth meaning cattle, we get that it's a kind of ox, this beast. And God is sort of poetically telling Job about its power and its sort of insurmountability. And I made this, and you can't even imagine this kind of power. And he follows
How
it
powerful
up.
can it be eating grass as some kind of vegetarian? I'm not impressed.
Oh well. What it talks about is muscles. I thought you as a child would appreciate that.
I'm just kidding. I mean the power of the muscles in its belly, so it's been doing crunches.
And not that this necessarily means anything, but notice the bronze usage again. Its bones are tubes of bronze.
Yes.
And
wow.
so
the things you notice, the sinews of its thigh are close knit. I feel like this is a sentence that you would only say, you would only write this if you have done a lot of butchering in your time. You know what I mean? If you've cut up a bunch of meat, you'd have a concept of like different types of meat, and you'd have a view that, wow, powerful, strong animals have close-knit sinew.
This is part of the problem of being a modern man, is that
exactly.
In a sense, we have access to all of the resources to understand the Bible, but we don't have the implicit experience. So, for example, I mentioned this in the Discord, how it just occurred to me extremely recently why Christ is born in a manger, which is a food trough for animals. It's, of course, telling us that he is the food, he is the communion bread. But that would never occur to me beforehand, because I don't have experience of what a manger is. I don't like intuitively understand what that is. It's just a word to me. How many times have I sung "Born in a Manger," no crib for a bed throughout my life, and not realized that, you know?
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, true. Although if they'd written it as feeding trough, that would be more immediately vivid. No, you know. And crib also is not a modern word. But anyway, if we start talking about the problems of Christmas carols, we'll be here all day.
Oh yeah. Although it's approaching that time. After Halloween, I can start feeling Christmassy.
So
I'm known to do that. So
sorry, where were we at with the Behemoth?
With the Behemoth, yes.
Would have been familiar with, I assume.
Yes, I'm sure people have heard of this. So this is the beast of the earth. It's one of the 2 beasts that he shows to Job.
It's lying under the lotus plant.
Yes, and it's kind of in hiding, and it's
kind of the Jabberwock of the Bible.
Power. It's masculine power, yeah. And the Lord of the Spirits has an episode on this that it just put out that talks about the Leviathan and the Behemoth just recently for Halloween, and I recommend people go watch that as well. But the Behemoth, they mention how the sort of bull worship in ancient paganism is so so everywhere. You know, you see it in the Epic of Gilgamesh with the bull of heaven, that they the gods have a bull that represents their sort of masculine power and virility, and that to go and defeat this bull, this impossible, powerful beast, is to kind of get one over on the gods, and it's an extreme treasure to acquire its meat. And also they talk about all sorts of unseemly, shall we say, fertility rituals with involving bulls. People can look up about the Apis bull worship in Egypt if they're so inclined, shall we say. But after this, and I'm going to be mainly talking about Leviathan. We find Leviathan. He describes in Job 41, and he describes this a kind of serpent of the sea. And Leviathan comes from Lotan, who was a servant of Yam, the god of the sea, in Canaanite mythology, in the Baal cycle. So if we just quickly explain a bit about Baal, Baal was like a thunder god to the Canaanites, and his enemy was Yam, the god of the sea. And Baal goes and defeats Yam, and one of the things he does is he defeats all of his serpents as well. One of which was Lotan, the sea serpent. And so this becomes Leviathan in Hebrew, and in fact, the word for sea in Hebrew is Yam. So again, we talked about how there is spirit in everything. The sea becomes a deity as well. There is spirit in the sea as well in that sense. And so when God in creation, he sort of sets the world in order, he's sort of defeating Yam as Baal did, in a sense. Now that's a bit off the beaten track, and I'm sure people find that rather a strange way of putting it, but I recommend you go to the Lords of Spirits for that, because it's a bit beyond my capabilities to talk about it in that way. But what happens is that Baal is a thunder god. He defeats the sea serpent, and then he defeats Yam finally. And what we find is that throughout paganism, this story is everywhere. So in Greek mythology, I should also add that Lotan is a seven-headed serpent. He has 7 heads. He has many heads, and so we find this story in paganism everywhere. If you go to Greek mythology, we have Hercules, who's the son of the thunder god, and he defeats the Hydra. And a Hydra, it's kind of implied in the name Hydros, is a water serpent with many heads. And you find this also in Babylonian mythology. Ninurta, who was a great king, he defeated the great 7-headed serpent in his mythology. And you see it also sort of in Norse mythology, where the destined fight at Ragnarok between Thor, the god of thunder, and Jormungandr, the great snake. The snake is a bit different, Jormungandr, because he holds the world together, and when he's disturbed, earthquakes are caused. And whereas Lotan, Leviathan, is a kind of destructive force. He's an agent of the chaos of the flood, as we see. And so they're a little different. We might think of it as kind of pagan projection, perhaps, but that's a discussion for another time. It's not just in European and Near Eastern mythology either. We see it also even in the Indian subcontinent, with Shesha, who is a many-headed serpent. He's a divine being, and he is a servant of Vishnu, basically. And we see it also continued in Buddhism, in the parallel of Mukalinda, and you can look up Mukalinda. There's statues of him at Angkor Wat. He's a 7-headed cobra, and he's one of the Bodhisattvas. He's a guardian of the Buddha, and I'm just going to dig out this sort of parable of Mukalinda here, and when I read it, it's going to sound like it's straight out of the Old Testament. So Mukalinda is a Nagaraja. The Naga are these sort of hybrid beasts that have the body of a human and they have the body of a serpent and the head of a human. And Mukalinda is the Nagaraja, that is, he is the king of Nagas. He's the king of serpents. And then what happens is that Buddha was meditating under the Bodhi tree for 6 weeks. And on the 7th week, a great flood came down from the heavens. The rain came down and flooded the earth, and the Buddha could have been disturbed in his meditation. And so Mukalinda, the 7-headed king of serpents, comes up from the earth, and he uses his body as a hood to cover the Buddha for the 7 days of the final week of the 7th week, the 7 days of the 7th week. And he covers his head and he protects Buddha from the elements so that he can meditate. And at the end of the flood, he takes the form of a human and he bows before Buddha. Now, if you replaced the names there to like Hebrew names, that sounds like straight out of the Bible, doesn't
it? Yeah.
But it's a kind of corrupted way, and in a way that I shouldn't talk about, because Buddhism is a very strange thing to talk about as a Christian, because it's another messianic religion, and it's strange to talk about how it comes out of the sort of polytheistic tradition of Hinduism. But the point to demonstrate is that just this Leviathan monster, this 7-headed serpent, is everywhere. It's a universal monster that has been in the stories of humans from the very beginning in Sumeria, and to the far reaches of Asia, all the way to the Scandinavian peninsulas with Jormungandr. This is a universal image. And so what is this? What is this creature? Well,
it is perplexing. I can see how other mythological beasts could be interpreted as a misidentification of a real life animal, but the details of this one are very specific and curious.
Is in the Book of Enoch. I know people would probably prefer I don't use that, but in the Book of Enoch, there are creatures called Kalkaidri, which are, and this might connect a lot of things on this, bronze hydras. Kalkos is like bronze, and Kaidri is hydra, so bronze water serpent, basically.
So the multiple long necks, I'm now thinking, are quite serpentine, you might say.
Yes. And so Kalkaidri are, well, the hydra are literally water serpents. So it's the same thing as Leviathan. But the Kalkaidri are divine beings alongside the Seraphim and the Cherubim in the Book of Enoch. And they're described as such. And they have 12 wings and all sorts of strange things. But that's just, you don't have to accept the Book of Enoch to understand that that is just a representation, another representation of this creature that people constantly understood everywhere. It was a universal It was a universal creature, and it's in the Christian tradition as well as Leviathan.
And 7 being the number of completeness, this is really saying it's one creature that represents the evil forces arrayed against the forces of good, right? This is, you've got lots of, we saw at the Tower of Babel, there were the evil, the sort of fallen sons of God who then led the different tribes. Each of those tribes was trouble for Israel. But then if you imagine all of the tribes together being just the external force pushing in, you could view that as a multi-headed snake or a hydra, right?
Yes, well,
and then
I
the
think
fact that it's then a sea creature is probably connected with the fact that the sea is associated with death and just the end of life and things like this, right?
well, specifically, it's the flood, which is chaos, right? So, Leviathan being a servant of the sea god Yam, he's a servant of chaos. And why is he a
And
servant of chaos? Is because he is an image of inverted hierarchy. We have, instead of one head ruling a body with a multiplicitous body, which is hierarchy, just regular divine hierarchy, as God does, monarchy kind of thing. It's many heads ruling one body. So he's the image of hierarchy turned upside down, overturned. And then
it's the image of committee thinking.
yes, exactly. And I know Radlib sort of connected this to global democracy, but perhaps we'll get onto that later. And so where was I? In this sense of thinking, that we see also this exact image in Jesus's temptation in the desert, and perhaps we should get along to that, considering
Yeah.
we're about 2 hours in. Should finally get to that famous passage in Matthew 4, I believe it is.
Here we are. Shall I read it?
Sure
Yes,
thing.
it's the first 11 verses, right? Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him.
Very good. So what do we have here is that Satan is tempting Jesus with kingship over the world. And Jesus rejects it by reasserting the proper hierarchy, that you should worship God. So he takes him to the pinnacle of the temple, and it tells him that his hierarchy, he should use his rulership. Actually, specifically, I should go to verse 8. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain. Again, the mountain is an image of hierarchy, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. "All this I will give to you," he said. "You will fall down if you will fall down and worship me." So we mentioned the I wills, the 5 I wills in Isaiah 14, about how Satan, his will is to ascend above everything, above the throne of God, above the stars of God, above the heavens. And if Jesus will make this possible for him, he will give him all the kingdoms of the world. And why would this be something that Jesus wants? Because he already has authority over the world. What Satan is really offering him here is the one thing that Jesus doesn't have, which is the hearts of men. And why does Satan possess this? Because he is the arbiter of the evil inclination. And so, if in response to this, Jesus reasserts the hierarchy of God, and he says, "Worship the Lord God and serve Him only." And then the devil leaves him. He defeats him in this sense because he reasserts the hierarchy over what Satan offers, which is the multiplicity of the hearts of the world. And obviously, this is destined to be defeated once again in the end times, which we'll get to shortly. So, are we following this? Okay. I feel like I'm rambling.
No, not at all. And I had about a million thoughts as we were going through this. So let's just quickly go through again. So, firstly, the devil. How do we want to connect this figure who's introduced with the characters who, the different characterizations of evil that we've seen from the Old Testament? I guess, do we think, for example, this is a fallen seraphim or cherubim?
How do we connect him with the fallen angels?
Is there? Are we? And we also looked at like the character Lucifer. These are, puzzle pieces which I guess have been put together in the past, but I wanted to see if we can just question that a little bit. How do we know who's being referred to in this passage?
We talked about how the spiritual in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, we see both that the kings being referred to are the material kings on earth, but also the spiritual kings, which were the fallen angels. And so what Satan is revealing himself to be here is the owner of all of these. He is the spiritual king of all of these kingdoms, and that he is now offering them to Jesus. Jonathan Pajot had a great line on this, and it's like, in the second act of the play, the true enemy behind all of the bad things going on is revealed. And in the image of Leviathan as the inverted hierarchy, like the total inverted hierarchy, and that is the Yetzer Hara, by the way, the rebellion, and it's also it's also the serpent, because actually the root word of Nakash is a word Natah, the primitive root, and it means to stretch out. And so we have also words coming from that root, like the word for to sink down, to descend, which is interesting. But that word Natah, that root, in the usage of the serpent, becomes something like the term hamartia for sin, that is to miss the mark. And hamartia is the Greek word used in the New Testament for sin, and it means to miss the mark. It's an archery term. You miss the bullseye. You're taken away from the true path, and you fall. You miss your target. And the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is that. It takes you away from the way of the Holy Spirit. It inclines you away from it. And how does he do this? Well, he is a servant of chaos, as we covered with Leviathan. He's a servant of the flood. But he doesn't do this by completely destroying hierarchy, because then a reality without structure is nothing. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want to be the king of nothing like he is, because he's already been made the king of nothing by God, and he hates it. But he wants to be the king of something. So how does he subvert hierarchy without destroying, without ending up exactly where he started as the king of nothing? He subverts the hierarchy. He turns it upside down, and he makes himself the king. He's a low thing that seeks to rise up high. And this is part of how he becomes this image, in that you have all these figures, the fallen angels, sort of in the middle of the Old Testament, and it becomes hard to see where Satan is in it. We saw Satan very clearly in the beginning, and we see him clearly now in the story of Jesus, but it's like, where was he for all this time? We see him in the book of Job as this kind of abstract force where he causes bad things to happen. He's kind of like the totality of bad things, of adversarial actions as the accuser. But
So,
is he just this abstract force as the evil inclination, or is he an entity?
well, given that it's the devil, it looks like an individual to me. It would be the surface reading on the face of it. It's not a king of the earth. It's not an abstract temptation. It could be those things, but the obvious way to read this is it's a specific spiritual entity, the tempter. Oops.
What I'm
Now,
presenting is that he's both of these things,
both things at once.
as was laid out with in the very beginning with the definite article.
Now, I was just going to say, what struck me. Let me just unload the thoughts I had when we went through this passage. I don't know if it's exactly pertinent to what we're saying, but Jesus is tempted with the same thing initially that Adam and Eve were tempted with, which is food. And in particular, he's been here fasting for the same time that the ark was out, and various symbolic meanings behind that. But then, so he's hungry, but he was fasting for a spiritual reason, I think. So the temptation to turn the stones into bread is to say a temptation to stop the fast, which was an act of worship to God, and to be consumed by pleasure-seeking short-term gain. And so Jesus's answer is to rebuke that temptation that Adam and Eve failed at. And I think what we kind of get to see is a counterfactual. What if Adam and Eve had not failed the first hurdle? It's almost like the tempter was surprised that humanity failed quite so quickly because he had other plans. Jesus passes the first test, and so we get to see what maybe would have happened next, further temptations. So
You've actually reminded me. You've reminded me of one thing I meant to bring up, as it relates to the flood story, but I forgot to. And that is that the raven and the dove, which Noah releases, is an image of the Last Judgment. And so,
go on.
He sends out the raven first, and the raven doesn't return. He doesn't return traditionally because the raven is a carrion bird, and he eats from the flesh of the bodies floating in the water. And you see this in iconographic depictions of the flood. And so he can carry on and he can keep flying. And then of course Noah releases the dove, and the dove flies back. It returns because it can't keep flying. It can't feed itself to keep flying, and so it returns. But on the third time, it finds land. It finds land, and what that does is ends the wandering that began with Cain. He finds a place to put his feet, and that takes us back to the beginning, back to Eden. But why the raven plays into it is he's consuming the remainder of the old world. He's eating what's left over. So he's fulfilling the role of the mouth of Hades in the Last Judgment, to consume to consume the dust as the serpent did.
Yeah, you think what
And so if we
actually
think of it,
happens to you when you enter Hades? You get eaten by the raven.
and if we think of this also in the context of Leviathan being a servant of the flood in the god Yam, then it all kind of makes sense, as it were.
So let's carry on through. Then the devil took him and brought him up to the highest point of the temple. Now, that immediately makes me think of the Tower of Babel that we were talking about, or Babel, like the highest point of the temple being a place that you would go to meet with false gods. It's almost like maybe the devil's been here before with previous groups of humans. And then if you think about the symbology of being asked to throw yourself down, given that you've ascended and you're being asked to drop and prove that nothing bad will happen, the temptation for Jesus here is almost like, well, surely you can do anything. You should exercise your freedom. Surely we've all heard that freedom is the greatest thing. Like in our modern culture, everybody wants to be free to act however they like, and wouldn't it be like, isn't it a constraint on Jesus that he has to be worried about falling down, but yet he can quote scripture and say like nothing bad will happen. And so Jesus is saying, no, like let's not put the Lord your God to the test, because you are inherently showing a lack of faith. I think, isn't that what the implication here is? Yes. And then where does the devil go next? Up a mountain. So he's kind of every time having to go closer and closer to right behavior, because he went to the temple, right? Yeah. Okay, he went up a mountain. Now mountains, that is where you meet with God. And yes. And he sees all the kingdoms. And this is when the offer becomes the closest thing to like this is the biggest temptation, I would think, that Jesus faced, in that there is a sense in which, I mean, I don't know that it makes any sense if he'd have accepted this offer. What would that have been? It kind of like bends your brain. But as you were saying, he really, like, God's heart really does break thinking about how misled mankind is. Now, if he had fallen for this, as it were, if he had bowed down to the devil, then maybe he would have temporarily had that worship from the people who otherwise were not worshipping him. But he would have broken his affinity with the Father, right? He would have been worshipping a false god. I don't know. What I can't figure out is did the devil actually think Jesus was going to go for this? I can't figure out. It kind of doesn't make sense. I kind of think the devil doesn't really understand who Jesus is in that sense.
Well, I think he does. We get into this kind of the paradoxical problem of divinity, where of omnipotence rather. You know, can God create an immovable object and then move it, or something like that?
Because I think the reality is that the devil and the demons and all the forces of evil, don't they know that they've got a short leash? Like they only can do anything because God permits it. You know, even look in Job, they have to go and ask him to tyrannize this individual. So what was he trying to accomplish here? So I think this was almost like last roll of the dice, pointless attempt. Although it looks like the biggest temptation, I think like it's
It's
kind of
it's the devil saying, "Come on, please."
yeah, I've got nothing. It's essentially it. But on a but maybe the devil was self-deceived into thinking this would actually had some hope at working. Anyway, sorry, just some thoughts as we were going through.
Not at all. Not at all.
Carry on.
So since we're getting on, we should really get to Revelations. I think.
Hooray!
Finally, we're there. Let's talk about
I'm
Revelations
sure now that
13.
we're in Revelation, things will become much easier to interpret.
Oh yes, Revelations 13. I think.
13. The dragon. The beast. Here is the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Now, that means a couple of the heads have extra horns, I guess. Very, mathematically, that always upset me. These numbers didn't divide.
Well, it comes from the vision of Daniel. I don't know if it's like each of the 7 heads had 10 horns or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but here we see sort of cons together with the image of the prophecy of Daniel, the vision of Daniel of the 4 beasts, all put into one. And again, we talked about how the devil is. There are all these kingdoms like Babylon, like Canaan, that are ruled over by these fallen angel principles. And in Daniel, they're all separate beasts. But in this beast, we see they're all part of the one beast. And obviously, Satan revealed this to us in Matthew 4, right there. That I am the Lord of all of these. I'm the man behind all of these ill things. And so we have that also put together with the image of Leviathan into one big picture of the 7 heads of a 7-headed dragon. And we see also what is rather interesting is that one of his heads, his 7th head, is wounded. It was fatally wounded, but it seems to have been healed. And this is rather strange, but if we understand what 7 is, the 7th day of the week is the Sabbath. It's the death of the week. And one of the things I was rather mind blown that I found out from Jonathan Pajot's brother is that if we think of the fundamental cycle, which is the circle, and we look at the circumference, like a unit circle, the circumference is pi times the radius. And for a unit circle, the fundamental circle, it's 6.28, and so on infinitely.
Sometimes called tau.
Yeah, tau, yeah. And so what is that? It is 6 full measures and a seventh which is incomplete, which is irrational. And so we see in creation, God rests on the 7th day. And we can understand then that the Sabbath isn't just a day of the week, it's in everything. And it's in motion, it's in the pattern of existence, that there's always this remainder left over that is irrational, that is death, really. That's the end of things. And there's a kind of infinite approach to that moment. And so how does the Most High transcend death? Because he has to. He doesn't infinitely put it off. He doesn't get rid of it because it's part of his creation. It exists. He transcends it. He rests and then he overcomes it, and he arises on Sunday, on the Lord's day. And so the devil here is seeking to imitate that miracle on his 7th head. He says it's wounded, but it's been healed. And the way that is different from what Christ did is that he has overcome death in a manner where he has destroyed it. Or not destroyed death. That's what Christ did. But he's he's sort of got the miracle of immortality by sort of overcoming his wounds, as opposed to what Christ did, which was literally die and then transcend it.
LaRue has reminded me that he very kindly sent a super chat, and I've yet to address it. So do you mind if we pause to do that? The question is, did Jesus destroy / render null the devil? And if so, how?
I don't think he destroyed the devil, because he's still with us, very powerfully so. But did he render him null? I think back to that line that Father De Young had on the serpent being cursed to eat dust. He's made the Lord of nothing, and then with Jesus, even that is taken away from him. Death is taken away from him. And so, in a sense, the devil's kingship is taken away from him, but he's in the process of losing it. He hasn't lost it quite yet. He's sort of, all the dead souls of the wicked are sort of flowing into his mouth right now, and they're kind of burying him, but he can't overcome. He can't really do anything about it. He knows that once this is all over, the day will come when he's going to be defeated, and there's nothing much he can do about it. But he hasn't been rendered null yet. He's still going to cause as much damage as he can while he has the time. I don't know if that answers the question well enough or not.
Yeah, I was made to think of 1 Corinthians 15. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, which giveth us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. So the victory Christ achieved does not remove death, but it removes the sting of death. Literally, like it's a creature which has been destinged. It's kind of it's no longer a danger. It's no longer got any attack power. So neutralized or nulled maybe is.
But it's important. It's important to understand that he's neutralized only for the people who have the secret sauce, which is belief in Jesus. And so he still has power over the non-believers, as it were, and God loves them too. But the devil is gonna, because he knows that God loves them, he's gonna sort of do with them the worst that he can, in order, just out of spite, perhaps, or in a vain attempt to overcome his fate. In a sense, he's like the ultimate nihilist. Why does a nihilist not just end it all and be rid of it? Or he's just kind of going to spitefully live his life and just be his. There's no point, man. But the devil is just gonna live his life like that. he's the ultimate atheist. He's the ultimate nihilist in that way.
I used to think that my favorite parts of the Bible were all of the Pauline philosophical arguments, and then for a while my favorite parts of the Bible have been the wisdom literature. But I think I'm developing a new favorite, which is all of this awesome kind of Old Testament, all this stuff that I've never really considered before, that's about the origins of spiritual things and ancient, almost so distant but so cool because it's so different. I'm just dipping my toes in, and I'm learning to love it.
Well, I'm kind of hoping we can trade places on that, because I've kind of come to Christianity recently, very recently. I've been studying the Bible I kind of got cottoned onto it first by Peterson, but I kind of let it lie for a while. He just made me realize that, these stories aren't just stupid, they mean something, even if it's not literal. So I can at least consider them that way, and they're sort of intellectually interesting in that way. But I kind of left it there with Peterson, and then just living my life, the Bible sort of kept coming up, as it were. Just there kept being biblical references here and there, and so I began to study it, and then the realizations just kind of started happening. But because what people love to reference in fiction and media is all this kind of esoteric stuff, my focus was really on Genesis and Revelations and Exodus and all of these very sort of obscure ancient history thing. That's why I love the Lord of the Spirits so much, because it sort of hits on this, and that's most of my knowledge. But I haven't, as Philippocrat talks about the circles, that Scripture is kind of this circular thing, and it goes, you get closer and closer to the center, which is where Jesus is. I read the book of Enoch before I read the Gospels when I came back to Christianity, which is crazy. But I look at it as like I'm from the outside coming in, and I'm going towards the center, which is Jesus. And I know Jesus from all of these moments in the Old Testament and in Revelations where he's there implicitly and he's symbolically, these very deep references. And eventually, hopefully, I'll get to the center. Although I have read the Gospels now, but hopefully, I'll get close to the center and to the Pauline literature and all of these things. So I suppose me and you are kind of
opposite ends. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yes,
you're having a more you're having an experience more like that of the Jews in the time of Christ, where you become super familiar with the Old Testament and then get this kind of wallop of new mysteries revealed and such.
It's like Paul and Peter, the apostle to the Jews and the apostle to the Gentiles. I guess talked a lot about how Peter is the rock. He consolidates things. He brings them together, whereas Paul sort of goes out into the world, out into the strangeness, and he's sort of curing people who are speaking tongues and pulling devils out of people, and he's evangelizing to the people of the world, and their union together, Peter and Paul, make the church. And so if we can get even 100th of that together, then we're doing all right.
Yeah, agreed. Was there anything else out of this passage you wanted to grab?
Just that. Well, there's also the beast of the earth, right, which is the lamb in this, the false prophet, and he draws attention to the beast. And so one of the things I mentioned to you in Discord that I said specifically this would be what would trigger LaRue the most, is that if we have a Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, all of which are God, can we also have a Trinity in the sense of we have the beast, the false prophet, and the Antichrist, or sorry, the beast. How should I say this? The devil, the Antichrist, and the false prophet, all of which are Satan. And so I need to qualify that in that I'm not a dualist, okay? Satan is not equal to God. He's kind of on the level of Saint Michael, and even then Saint Michael defeats him. But he imitates him in this way, in that he makes an image of himself on earth in the beast, in the Antichrist. And then the false prophets are representative of the spirit. They're kind of the inverse of the spirit. And there have been many antichrists throughout history. But if we think of, like I mentioned, with all the way back in the beginning with the evil inclination and the good inclination, if the ultimacy of the good inclination is the evil spirit, then the ultimacy of the evil inclination is in the devil here, in the false prophets that draw attention to the inverted hierarchy of the beast.
Hmm.
You know, the horns of a lamb, but speaks like a dragon.
Yeah. Yeah. It strikes me the fact that this false beast, it says that it was given power, even performing great signs such as causing fire to come out of heaven in full view of the people, because the power was given on behalf of the first beast, and therefore it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. This sounds like what I was talking about with the idols in the Old Testament having genuine powers and abilities. I'm not saying that Revelation is talking about the Old Testament, but if this is a plausible, I'm thinking about all the different ways you can read Revelation. And okay, some people will talk about the fire coming down from heaven to earth could be picture language, talking about the fact that false religions are able to persuade people to do charitable works like real religion does, and therefore they're misled. So this could be talking about, say, Islam. But either way, the point being that this is an idol, right? The people praise it as if it was Jesus, but it does have the ability to do actual powers, despite the fact that we know an idol is nothing on the earth. But it's been empowered in some way. So
Yes,
I just had to make that
and
point.
I think we better draw this to a close soon because we're getting on at time.
Yes.
But the last thing I wanted to talk about was the modern image of the devil. And so we have
Yes.
two. He has two horns. He has a forked tongue, and he carries a pitchfork. Yes, two horns like a lamb. Yeah.
Maybe that's where the horns come from.
Yeah, perhaps. And people like to say that this is an image that's just drawn together, is just sort of an artistic representation that kind of evolved over time or something. But I don't think it's so arbitrary. You know, every depiction is, you know, a representation, but I think really that image of the devil is the image of the fork, and that is the what is shown to us in Leviathan with the many heads on one body, but it is duplicitousness, if you put it like that. You know, you meet the devil at a fork in the road, which is to say, in the place between roads, where you don't know which road that you're on. It's the place of confusion. And his weapon is this. Very importantly, this is his weapon. And that the fork, the pitchfork, that is his weapon. He has a forked tongue. He speaks this way. He, you know, causes confusion, and you know you can link that back to the Tower of Babel, of course. Yeah, this is the image that he is, and the inverse of that is the cross. The cross is, you know, it is the place where things intersect, but it's also an image of hierarchy, of things coming down into the multiplicity from one head. And we see this in Revelations 5 with the Lamb of God. And that we have a lamb with 7 horns and 7 eyes, all from one head. And that is the inverse of the beast here in Revelations 13. And that's why he's Christ.
So the image of the beast, the images of the devil that we have in popular culture. Well, I guess I guess I agree to some degree that there's symbolic reason that certain certain additions to the law adhere, and others do not. But a really interesting point was made in one of the podcasts that I listened to, that representations of the forces of darkness, you could often look at them from the perspective of propaganda. This is a way to make, often, for example, there's perceptions that the forces of darkness will win in the end, or stand some chance. Is that because real demonic forces, real fallen angels and such, actually think they have a hope? I don't think that's plausible. But do they propagandize humans and make them think that they could be on a winning team if they fight against God? Maybe. And I sometimes think about that with the images of the devil that have survived. Have these been carefully chosen almost by the forces of darkness? Like, Milton paints the devil quite sympathetically. I remember there was a comedy show I used to listen to that was on Radio 4 by Andy, what's his name? Anyway, he gives quite a sympathetic portrait of the devil. It's kind of a retelling of the idea of the devil, but where the devil is the main character, and it's kind of a funny, cutesy, bureaucratic vision. And you think every time one of these is created, it's spinning some subtle lie, just like we've seen all the lies that the deceiver in the Bible says, he doesn't want you to eat from that tree because of this, or God will catch you, don't worry. What are the little lies we find in representations of the devil? Because the reality, I think, is beyond comprehension. So that seems like a key way tactically to jump in and cause some subversion. I mean, the winnowing fork in the Bible, I think, is wielded actually by God. God is the one who is the one you should be scared of, who's like wrath, sinners should fear. But when you put the winnowing fork in the devil's hand, are you fearing the wrong being? Are you thinking, oh, I'd better watch out for the devil and be on his good side?
What's interesting is that the way that God puts the devil down in Revelations eventually is by the spear of Saint Michael. That is, he pins him to the ground, like pushes him down with this sort of spear, and then he gets cast into the deepest pits. So he's put in his place in that way. I just saw the number 666. I don't think we have time to talk about that, but
no, we were. I mean, we were going to. I don't know if this will ever happen at this point. We were going to have a look at this with AA and Radlib. They both had agreed to do it. So if I pushed hard enough, I could probably make it happen. Just deciding whether to use up my, my brownie points on that. But yeah, I mean, based on this paragraph, people have had all kinds of speculations about what this chapter is about.
Yes, there's been a lot of interpretation that is that the beast is in reference to Nero and Rome, and this is the kind of preterist conception. But I think what's important to understand, and I know I'm kind of biased in the sense that I've been reading a lot of Orthodox writers, but it's just happenstance that they're the ones that write the most about these kind of outside interpretations. Like I said, that is what I'm interested in, and what they talk about is that it's the devil. You can kind of integrate the preterist and futurist views of Revelations into one, because it's not just showing one Antichrist, because Judas was the first Antichrist, but there have been many throughout history, and we're told that there will be many more. And so, in that sense, Revelations becomes the kind of pattern of the end for all worlds, and not just one, and macrocosm and microcosm. And so, you see with the beast and with the dragon is that you have all levels of reality represented. So, we have the head of the beasts, the heads of the beasts that come down to the body and they rule the body, but the heads are also have kings on them. There's 7 kings, and so the kings come down and rule their people, and then the 7 heads are also 7 hells. So the hell comes down and rules the land, and we have these progressively higher and higher levels, and so it represents, the end of all things, really, and it becomes a pattern for understanding how something comes to an end in the sense of the last judgment. There will be one final last judgment in the future, but at the end of your world, as a microcosm, when you die, you will be judged also in this way, and the heart will be circumcised. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, will be cast down into hell to be with the devil. It will be rendered unto him, as it were. And the good part of you, if it exists, hopefully, that believes in God, will be brought up to him. Of course, this ultimately becomes either an all or nothing thing, where you either go to hell or you go to heaven, but it resolves itself in this way. And what was I going to say? Yeah, the sense that it is Nero and Rome is part of it. Certainly that was an occurrence of that. Oh, I think Landa just dropped out. But it happens many times over again. So, like, for example, with the 7 hells representing Rome, well, that's one city, but there are many cities on 7 hells. For example, Brussels. And people can take that however they would like with respects to the EU. Okay, I think we've lost Lambda. See if we can get him back. Well, this isn't good. I am Lambda. I am Lambda. Happy Halloween, everyone. Rome was the one who made a religion, but Brussels is also, as we see, making something of a religion itself.
My internet went down, but I'm back.
Oh, we're back.
I was just going to make an excellent point, and then the internet went down. And given the subject we're talking about, it's just extra suspicious.
Oh, of course.
But I see that we've still got the same number of viewers as when I left, so you obviously did a good job of filling the airwaves.
Okay,
I was just going to say that there seems like an obvious parallel here, that in bits of the Old Testament, we were hearing about specific historic individuals being talked about, and also the general pattern of what the devil is like. So, like the king of Babylon and also Lucifer. And then in this passage in Revelation, which I'm no longer sharing, I guess, we're talking about both Nero and the pattern of the demonic forces, the devil, whatever we want to call it. This is very strong for your thesis that we should talk about these passages as both and.
Yes, one of the things I mentioned while you were gone is that with respect to the 7 hells thing, that's often taken as an image of Rome, but there are many cities that are built on 7 hells, and an example from our time is Brussels. Brussels is built on 7 hells, and so we can take that as a perhaps an indication of the EU's purpose, if we will.
Yeah.
But that's up to
But if you take this, the trouble
themselves.
with the Nero theory, right, is if it's just talking about Nero, what's the fire that Nero caused to fall from heaven? And what's the what's the mark on people's heads that stopped them from buying and selling for Nero? I think these are all a bit of a stretch. But if you say that Nero is an example of this general force in history, and then I would then, so if people want my current take on Mark of the Beast, right, there will be cases when believers are forced to take a mark of some sort. I don't think it has to be literally on their hands or foreheads, but do something which means that they are worshipping something else than God. And that a real believer will not do. And it will cause them to, well, it says here, not buy or sell. Maybe that's literal, or maybe it's just some kind of cost. So you can make it very general. But if we're talking about at some point, suppose we reached a stage where, theoretically, imagine a banking system where the transactions you make are in some way checked against your compliance with the system. Maybe this isn't such a crazy thing to imagine. And that part of the compliance with that system meant going against direct biblical injunctions. For example, you had to worship in some form something other than God, or you had to go against your belief in biblical principles. LGBT stuff would be the obvious way, maybe. You should accept being locked out of that system on this principle, and that your spiritual health, your eternal destiny might be decided based on your ability to persevere in being thrown out of society and persecuted directly. So I think that this is a very potentially practical thing to think through. Sorry, I felt the need to, since we've stumbled across this, I thought I ought to say my piece.
Yes, well, I have to go in a couple
Oh
of minutes.
yes.
But
Quickly, is there anything else you wanted to say?
I did want to talk about some of the things that are satanic in the modern world, and obviously
Please.
you touched on the LGBT stuff. What that is the image of the rainbow is lifted up above everything, which is multiplicity. It's think of the Pink Floyd album cover. Light becomes the rainbow, but appropriately in Christian iconography, the rainbow is like the throne of Jesus. You see this a lot in images of the Last Judgment, that the multiplicity of the rainbow is the throne of Jesus, whereas lifting the rainbow up above everything, that's an image of the beast. And certainly with the multiplicitous identities, and of course it's no coincidence that the most used acronym version of the acronym now is LGBTQIA, which is 7 letters. Yeah, and the sort of multiplicitous identities of constantly adding on to them, it's for the purpose of confusion. It's for the purpose of subverting the natural order, and making a many-headed beast of yourself. A couple other things that are satanic in the modern world, just quickly, well, really in all worlds, is we see that money, wealth is also satanic. But in the same sense, so is socialism, because that is the dictatorship of the proletariat, all of these things. But I think also one last thing I should touch on is, I had this thought recently as to why does Jesus spend so much of his time sort of arguing with the Pharisees, because he's not got much time on earth. So why does he spend so much time on that? And the reason why is he's doing the same thing with the Pharisees that that God did with the pagan gods, his fight with the pagan gods throughout the Old Testament. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Hmm.
I suppose we should end on that because that is our place in this. I don't think with the vaccines being taken as the mark of the beast and all thing that this is the end, but it's the end of our world. Put it that way. And a lot of people, most of them non-Christian, have talked about this. How we're coming to the end of empire. It's the end of our world. It doesn't have to completely fulfill the image of Revelations, but it approaches it. Put it that way. And Revelations, as complicated as it is, it makes clear what our role is in this, and that we have to kind of resign ourselves that we are going to be excluded. We're not going to be able to buy or trade, and that we should resign ourselves to this and be as the line of Seth was in Genesis, outside of the cities, away from society, which is clearing us out, by the day, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, certainly, we will be saved for that.
Yeah, and as confusing as some of the things we've discussed today can appear, we can trust that God will make apparent to us what we should do at the proper time. It might just be that mulling over these things, these bits of scripture, maybe some of it will click and we'll see things happen, and suddenly, if you were around before Jesus was born, trying to interpret bits of the Old Testament that referred to him, you might have had a serious head-scratching Bible study with your mates and been like, what is the man of sorrows? Is that a generic kind of, is this referring to every time a Jew is in this situation? And then Jesus comes along and is like, oh, okay, well, maybe it also has those general applicabilities, but very clearly it applies in this situation.
One of my favorite examples of that is, of course, Abraham, when he's sacrificing Isaac. Why on earth would God, bring Abraham to do such a thing? That's so horrible. Why would he play this prank on him? But God is appearing to Abraham on that mountain, again with the mountains, as the angel of the Lord. And of course, in tradition, we understand the angel of the Lord to be Jesus. And so it makes perfect sense. Why this? Why does that make him worthy? Why does that make Abraham worthy to be the father of nations? And it's because he would sacrifice his only son, as God would later go on to do. And
I would say the story of what happened to Noah is a similar picture, but about what has yet to happen.
Yes. It's kind of like I mentioned with the raven and the dove being a kind of miniature image of the Last Judgment. And of course the garden afterwards. It really is the same. It's a pattern of how reality really is. It's the structure of reality is in the Bible. Now I really have to go, but
okay.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Well, thank you so much for preparing that and sitting with me for a 3-hour stream. I'm glad we had the time, because it was really, really worth it. So thanks again.
Yeah. One thing I hope if I've accomplished anything here, like I said in the beginning, that it gives people a full picture of what the devil is. That there really is a complete pattern of who he is, from the very beginning in Genesis 3 with the bronze snake, all the way to Revelations, and that to not be confused when you are confronted by him in your own life, to know what his intentions are for you, and to avoid them.
Fantastic. Well, good night.
Thank you so much.